This is about the reflection paper on Asian Americans in an anti-black world. That is based on the book of the Claire Jean Kim, the professor from the UC Irvine. My introduction is the positioning of Asian Americans within the framework of anti-blackness is a powerful theme in Claire Jean Kim's book, that is Asian Americans in an Anti-Black World. Kim critiques the model minority stereotype as a tool that does not simply acknowledge Asian American achievements, but strategically places Asian Americans in a divisive role, on one that upholds anti black structures. Her works sheds light on the complexity of Asian American identity in a racial hierarchy, illustrating how Asian Americans are both marginalized and yet at times unwittingly used to reinforce the subjugation of black communities. Structural anti blackness and reflect on the podcast insights regarding affirmative action and structural racism. The comparisons and contrasts Kim's work with the model minority concept. Kim's book and the course readings reveal the model minority myth as a constructed stereotype that has more to do with maintaining racial hierarchies than celebrating Asian American success. This stereotype, which emphasizes Asian American had work and success within predominantly white institutions, sets up Asian American as a standard of minority success, and is often invoked to deny the effects of structural racism on black communities. Kim shows that rather than recognizing the diversity of the Asian American experiences, the model minority myth flattens these experiences into a single narrative that promotes the docility and compliance within white majority institutions. This myth thus contrasts with the reality that Asian American identities are complex and multifaceted, affected by socioeconomic, cultural, and historical factors that extend far beyond the limitations of the stereotype. By contrast, Kim's work focuses on how Asian Americans are positioned within structures that support anti blackness. Her analysis is less about individual achievements and more about the social and political function of Asian American identity in the racial hierarchy. She asserts that while Asian Americans are themselves marginalized, they have also been weaponized, often involuntarily, as tools to reinforce anti black sentiments. This positioning serves to create a false narrative of racial equity in the United States, suggesting that Black Americans' struggle against systemic barriers are due to their own failures rather than the effects of structural racism. Political possibilities for resisting anti blackness. In her introduction, Kim poses a thought provoking question. What political possibilities might be opened up if Asian Americans completed the movement's half finished critic? Can Asian Americanness be reimagined as a force that destabilizes rather than stabilizes an anti black wall? This challenge invites Asian Americans to rethink their role in the racial hierarchy and to seek solidarity with Black communities. One potential pathway involves actively confronting and rejecting the model minority myth. By vocalizing the limitations and harms of this stereotype, Asian Americans can dispel the myth that their successes are inherently proof of a fair society. Instead, they can highlight the structural advantages and unique challenges that shape their community's experiences, rejecting any narrative that pits them against Black Americans. To reimagine the Asian American as a destabilizing force in an anti Black world, Asian Americans might also join cross racial coalitions that address issues such as police brutality, economic inequality, and educational disparities. These coalitions can focus on shared experience of marginalization while resisting narratives that reduce their struggles to competition for resources or visibility. Such alliance can also help build a united front for policies like reparations and other forms of institutional red redress that directly address the impacts of structural anti Blackness. Insights from the podcast Affirmative Action and Institutional Racism. In the podcast, Kim discusses affirmative action and the ways Asian Americans have been co opted in recent legal arguments to serve as a wedge against Black communities by suggesting that Asian Americans are victims of affirmative action policies that benefit Black and Latino communities. Opponents of affirmative action present a distorted image of a raciality fair society where only hard work determines success. Kim argues that misuse of Asian American experiences not only harms Black communities, but also ignores the very real ceilings that Asian Americans themselves encounter within predominantly white institutions. This argument overlooks the ways in which institutional success for some minorities can coexist with systemic anti Black racism. Kim's critic encourages us to see that even if some Asian Americans achieve success, this does not invalidate the presence of structural barriers that disproportionately affect Black communities. She argues for a perspective that recognizes both the successes and the system barriers faced by Asian Americans without allowing these to be used to delegitimize the struggles of other marginalized groups. The diversity programs versus reparations. Kim's critics of diversity program, as discussed in the podcast, presents a compelling case for reparation-based approaches. She argues that while diversity initiatives are well-intentioned, they can often fail to address the historical and ongoing impacts of anti-Black racism. Diversity programs frequently focus on representation rather than on structural change, allowing institutions to avoid accountability for deep seated inequalities. In contrast, reparations programs directly address the historical harms inflicted on Black Americans, acknowledging systemic oppression rather than seeking to gloss over it with symbolic gestures. Kim's critics highlights a critical need of programs that go beyond superficial diversity and directly engage with the legacies of racial injustice that continue to impact communities today. Claire Jean Kim's Asian Americans in an Anti-Black World challenges Asian Americans to recognize their role in a broader racial structure that continues to uphold anti-Blackness. This reflection has examined how Kim's work critiques the model minority myth and exploring the potential for political action through coalition building and advocacy for reparations. In a society where racial progress often comes at the expense of one group over another, it is crucial for Asian Americans to find solidarity with Black communities. Through self reflection and collective action, Asian Americans can help destabilize the anti Black structures moving towards a more equitable society for all marginalized groups. Thank you for letting me present this Asian Americans' perspective on anti Blackness.